Welcome to Noble, a network of owners, business leaders, and entrepreneurs. Here, we focus on the 5 stages of business: launching an idea, establishing a business, hiring employees, creating leaders, and then expanding your impact. We hope you enjoy today's session.
And my name is Dr. Doug Brackmann, and I am a licensed psychologist. And if anybody ever, if you know any psychologists, God help you, but we get into psychology to figure out our own crap. And it's an interesting group of people that get into psychology, me being one of them. But as Tanisha said, I had a very interesting childhood. I am a high school dropout. I dropped out of high school when I was 16. Wound up living in a car most of my 17s. Discovered how much that really sucked. It was a horrible experience. But then somewhere around 18, actually a couple months after I turned 18, I had this moment of clarity, they call it, where you can simply look at your whole life perspective. Excuse me, got this wrong. And ask yourself very simply, what am I doing? Not with all this shame and attack, but really just this curious kind of exploration of looking at oneself, kind of from the outside in. And that moment of clarity is something that I have explored for 38, 39 years now, since that time of sitting in that car next to these railroad tracks and having a very heavy set woman banging on the back window, yelling at me, "Can't sleep here." And it was the first kind of moment of awakening, if we'll call it. But going back before that, I graduated high school in 1986, would have graduated high school in 1986. So I went to elementary school all through the 70s. And ADD, ADHD was not a big thing back then. I was just the pain in the butt little kid not paying attention and, really feeling like I was different, feeling like there was something about me that just didn't fit in with everybody else. And I had this kind of deep awareness that, school was kind of dumb. It didn't make sense to me. Like, why are we sitting in these little rows memorizing stuff that I'm never going to use the rest of my life? And so that really spurred me into, combining that with this profound awareness that living in a car at 17, 18 is not normal. And so through a series of twists and turns and graduate school in 1991, there was an article that came out in Time magazine that described the genetics of alcoholism and addiction. And it was the dopamine receptor, DRD2-A1 allele gene. And it was this Time magazine article, big cover. It was, we found the alcoholism gene. And first year of graduate school, and it was a profound kind of, hey, wait a minute, that might explain a lot about what I am. And so the genetics behind this, and this same time, ADD and ADHD was just blowing up in the psychology world. And so this different kind of human being that was part of the human herd, but there is this difference. And wanting to feel like I was normal, wanting to feel like there was nothing really wrong with me, even though I felt that profoundly, I dove deep into it. And so from 1991 to now, that has been my complete focus. And the hunter-farmer theory, a guy named Thomas Hartman came out with a book. His kid was profoundly ADD, ADHD, and they're medicating him, and he's, obviously not fitting into school. And Thomas Hartman was really the guy who I credit with coming up with this understanding that 9,000 years ago, the human herd began to adapt to something called the agricultural revolution. And so the world goes through these evolutionary changes. And if you think about what happened, 9,000 years ago, believe it or not, The world's climate goes up and down all the time. It's been doing it for thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. So the last 9,000 years has been a remarkably calm period of climate. And that has allowed the humans to basically develop a much easier way to live. And farming compared to hunter gathering is ridiculously easy. And so this theory that most of the human population, that seems about 95% of the human population, adapted to a much more predictable, sedentary, linear way of going through the world. And if you think about what it takes to farm, you are literally repeating what you did last year again and again and again, knowing that that's going to increase the likelihood of your survival. You're incredibly tolerant of what would be, to me, incredibly boring things to do, of literally watching things grow. You have this sustained reward system. You can delay your reward, knowing that the crops are going to eventually produce, and so human beings, that we are a bunch of animals on this planet. Most human beings adapted to that, but because of the rapidly changing climate periods of time, ice ages and meteorites hitting the planet, the resilience of these genetics around what I am and what I call driven is incredibly strong, meaning that we are very important to the herd survival. God forbid anything catastrophe happens. And so about 3, 4, 5, 8% of the general population have retained these original hunter genetics, is what Thomas Hartman said. And since 1991 to now, it has been an incredible time to be a psychologist. And because there's big money in ADD and ADHD medications, they've done a ton of these things called functional MRIs. And so you put you put this ADD population in a functional MRI. Very simply, the brain's dominance, what part of the brain is dominant, adapted to the agricultural revolution by creating this ball of energy in the left prefrontal. It's called the executive function. What the executive function does in the brain, it tunes information out. And so it keeps you on track. Like, that's not important, that's not important, that's not important, that's not important. This is what matters. You put your finger in the ground, you put corn, and then you do this. And if I were trying to farm and, was, I would very quickly get bored and wander away from the crops, be chasing butterflies, where the farmer is truly adapted to a different world, adapted to this world. And as I often joke, it is a farmer's world. Most, I often joke with my clients that I am truly unemployable. I cannot sit in a cubicle. I have a very difficult time following directions. The IKEA furniture is a bunch of screws, and I'm going to put it together the way it looks like. Where I'm just not suited to that. You put me in a functional MRI, and this is where it starts to get interesting. The back of my head lights up. And so the back of the head, called the occipital lobe, is about vision. And so I use my eyeballs to go through the world. And as a byproduct of that, I have something called hypofrontality. Hypofrontality is the defining feature of ADD, ADHD. And it allows me to do something called multi-think. And so rather than tuning information out, I have a wide, big picture view of the world. And rather than seeing the world as a series of logical, simple steps, I see it this way, where everything is happening at the same time. And so we have this wonky sense of time. But this explanation that I and people like me are very important to the survival of the herd. More importantly, we're also a very important part of this present, what's going on right now. See people like us. Musk is one of us, and he is looking at the big picture and able to adapt. And so what makes us different? Reward systems is that original genetic. So the dopamine receptor number 2 is the boredom gene. And that boredom gene is very simply um, when I don't have enough visual, mental, or psychological stimulation, my central nervous system starts to feel this sense of impending doom, starts to feel this sense that there's something missing or wrong. And it is, you know, very simply a reflection of the way I'm wired, not a reflection of reality. So situations aren't boring. I find them boring. That's um, the other genetics around reward system that we vary on very often is I find it much more interesting because it's much more true for me is this dopamine receptor number 4. So DRD4, dopamine receptor number 4, dash 7R allele gene. And what an allele gene is, and they used to believe that is it a big argument, is it nature versus nurture? That argument's been taken away. It's no longer even talked about because of this thing called epigenetics, meaning that our genetics adapt to the environment, and the environment triggers these genetics to turn on and turn off. What dopamine number 4 is associated with is the FOMO gene or the wandering gene. And a great article in National Geographic about the wandering gene. And what it is, it makes me feel like there's more woolly mammoths over the next hill. And if you know, and if you start thinking about, entrepreneurs or ADD people, it's the shiny object syndrome. We're always chasing shiny stuff. And that feeling that, it's going to be better later is very impactful to our psychology. And so, and as I said earlier, this Navy SEALs, and I was very fortunate to work in Navy Special Warfare for about 8-9 years, and working primarily with the SEAL teams, and they are a bunch of drivens, a bunch of ADD, ADHD, and this resilience and risk. And if you think about risk, and well, the kind of it's an interesting thing to measure because risk takers don't feel like they're risk takers. Why? Because I've really thought about all the contingencies, but looking from the outside in, I'm nuts. And so it's like, I don't feel like it though. And those who are risk adverse know they're risk adverse. And so it's, if you don't think you're a risk taker, you're probably a risk taker. It's an interesting, the resilience component of it. And this is really the last 5 years, 10 years of my work. We are designed as driven people to live in a much more trauma filled world. If you think about, the hunter's world 10,000 years ago, saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths and people throwing rocks at you and spears, it was a risk-filled world. And this adaptation, that we are very resilient to risk, this neuropeptide Y, I write about it in my book, it's the best predictor to make it through BUDS training, become a Navy SEAL, 6 months of hell, is this neuropeptide. And it's the ability to really overcome adversity. There's 9,999 different ways to not make a light bulb, and yet we'll never. And so this constellation of all these kind of factors go into what I call driven. And it's not one thing. And so I have on my assessment, if you guys took my assessment, I look at the 10 variables that I have, found to be associated with it. And they vary. And so even within the driven community, there's, in Navy SEALs, I always call them, there's 2 types of Navy SEALs. There's snipers, sneaky SEALs, and there's door kickers. And, that's the difference between ADHD and ADD. And even now, as they are slicing up ADD, I think they're up to 13 different types of ADD, whatever. I mean, it is, but within this constellation, the biggest variable, and it is this really different identity. And largely because of the difference, the primary difference between drivens and non-drivens is this executive function. And so that executive function, tuning things out, creates a very simple identity. If you think about, we went from hunter-gatherer groups of 30 and 40 to these populations of millions. Most non-drivens, adapted into becoming butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. They have a very simple yet cohesive sense of identity. We, on the other hand, drivens, that's the other joke I always say about drivens. You want to send a driven to hell, ask them to figure out who they are, because we're Da Vinci's, we're all over the map. But we still need a sense of identity. And so this internal feeling, and we tend to, as driven people, use our feelings as the basis of our identity. And I could have called the book The Shame-Based Identity. Why? Because it is the most consistent thing in my world, is feeling the sense that there's something missing or wrong with me. And so this imposter syndrome, and you hear it in every famous person and most, people that are creative types and comedians and all of that have, are drivens. And so I don't feel like I should. And if you think about that as how should I feel as a dual PhD? Well, I should feel, and the truth of it is, it's actually pretty painful. As Dr. Jim Spira, my doctoral dissertation chair, shook my hand for the first time and said, "Congratulations, Dr. Brackmann, first guy to ever call me doctor." My inner experience, and then my monkey mind's reaction to that was, haha, he bought it. My multi-thinking brain could think about all the little corners I cut and all the little things I could have expanded on. I could have made it better. And that feeling that nothing is ever good enough is really driven. So, um, 2 PhDs is ridiculous. That is a crazy thing to do. But it was coming from a place of hoping I would feel like I was competent. Didn't work. And more importantly, you're not your feelings. The variance, this is another thing that really gets people into my office. The human, we're a herding animal, and meaning that we survive by living in groups, and we are born 5 years too early, really. I mean, we are born a ball of meat for a saber-tooth tiger to come along and eat. So we are completely dependent upon our caretakers to protect us and keep us safe. But this herding mentality that is really designed for large groups of people. And, it is the variance within the herd, and most non-drivens have a much more herd mentality, where some of the hardest groups I've ever done, where it is a SEAL team of 7. They're normally 8, but there's one missing. He was killed in IAD or whatever. And I've sat in those groups, and drivens are wired as wolf packs. We are a pack mentality. And so oftentimes, when a wolf dies in a wolf pack, there is 6 months to 9 months of grieving. And what drives a SEAL team? Through this ego and narcissism. No, it's love. This really deep camaraderie band of brothers for each other. Some of the most intense connections I've ever experienced. It's the other joke about ADD. We love with abandon, but we're actually looking for something much deeper. And so it's a interesting variable that gets people in my office, and a lot of drivens have given up. Why? Because what happens when a cheetah runs into a herd of gazelles? They scatter. Everybody's on their own and good luck. But what happens when a bear attacks one of the pack mates? What do all the other wolves do? Is we jump on the bear. So most drivens are truly looking to have somebody just really have their back. And that is, we despite being often seen as non-caring or sociopathic even, or um, we actually have a very deep sense of need for attachment. And so it's a thing that gets people into my office. Um, why is that? Um, Very simply, how many sheep does it take to catch a blade of grass? One. And so in a herd mentality, there's much more of a sense of individual survival, where in a pack mentality, how many wolves does it take to catch an elk? It's all of it. And so it makes sense, and it is this deeper wiring, and I think it's really important as this world changes. Um, I think we're really important for a couple different reasons, and I often joke I'm less of a believer in Christ than a knower. Um, and so I struggle with my belief in Christ, but I know Christ, and so it's a deep sense of obligation that I have personally found in the work I'm doing. Um, we are about 1 in 12 people, and if you look at the apostles, and if you guys watch Chosen, it's great. Um, but we are Peters. We are full of pride. We are always sticking our foot in our mouths. We are running security for Christ. We are, um, more importantly, full of shame and pride. And this feeling that there's something wrong with me, and this boisterous big persona that I may put up to hide that. And it is this very deep understanding, um, that we also see the world very differently than most. We live in a world of nuance, and as we've watched this, particularly through COVID and everything that's happened in the last, um, really 8 years, 5 years, most of the human herd gets very stuck on narratives. They really want to believe this narrative. Where drivens, we live in a world of nuance. We actually see through. And excuse my French, but you can't bullshit bullshitters. We are consummate bullshitters. We are really good at changing the narrative to suit us. And why is that? Because we get that no narratives are really true. And so Peter, great example of it though, until we are broken. And what does broken mean? Broken is this inner experience of understanding that if I live my life based upon the way my flesh is driving me, I'm going to wind up living in a car. I'm going to wind up being, these are the addictive genetics. This is the addictive personality. And so we are also prone to really blowing our lives up. And so, as I often say, 2/3 of us as drivens are probably lost in their addictions to some degree, you know, whether it's sex, drugs, rock and roll, or whatever, or money. We get lost in this consummate until we actually hit the wall and really discover that, um, the only problem I truly have in this world is myself. And as we are chosen to either discover a spiritual path or completely blow our lives up. And one of my doctoral dissertation was about self-sabotage, self-fulfilling prophecy, and I will get into meditation here and really what I call spirituality. And there's an old joke about, um, well, I often say it too. I have a distaste for religion as much as Christ. Christ did not like religion. He was not a fan, neither am I. And what is religion? Religion is living by a narrative in your head. And believing this narrative in your head is, the way to go. And it is literally the law. And whether it's, religious law or social scripting law or, um, laws of your family, to be believing that the law is going to make you fit in and make you safe is what Christ was really talking about, being freed from. He is the second Adam, as they say. Um, so As you can tell, I'm not a typical psychologist. I'm pretty, pretty out there. One of the things I did, I was in Bujinkan, which was a martial arts, a Japanese martial arts, and my martial arts instructor was a Navy SEAL sniper, retired. Um, and we were working with entrepreneurs, and I've been a 25-year meditator. And why is meditation so drawn into this need um, for what I need to do, which is really get me out of my own way. And so meditation was a way um, of killing myself. And that's a very traditional Zen term. And, Vedic Christianity is really about killing the self. What are they even talking um, and so I rebranded myself, wanted to really break the brand of being a typical psychologist, particularly in this woke world. I am not of that. Um, and so I came up with this ability to really use long range shooting as a way of teaching the fundamental basics of both human biology, human anatomy, self psychology, and meditation. So this is my tagline: is I teach meditation at gunpoint. And as you can see, this is it is long range shooting. So the first little mound you'll see is about 200 yards. That goes out to the line of targets in the center of it is 1,000 yards. If you look off to the right to the farthest hill, that's a mile. We typically shoot out to a mile, which the monkey mind, this belief system, your identity, your sense of self says, no way, I cannot do that. But if you learn to actually follow the process and stay out of the results, it's remarkable what you can achieve. So this gets into really what I do is I teach people a very fundamental, simple way of conceiving themselves. And so what is this sense of self? Um, and the key takeaway, and if you look at the gun, we use really big guns. So that's called a 375 Tritech. It has about a 600-yard more range than a 50 BMG. It is no joke. And it is incredibly loud. It'll blow your hat off if you're standing next to it. But the truth is, there is no recoil in the present moment. And so this capacity to, like, well, wait a second. So if I'm anticipating recoil, called a flinch, where you start to brace yourself, anticipating something in the future, you're not present. And so it was a way of actually helping people understand this very simple metaphor that I teach about human identity. And so this goes back to Siddhartha Gautama was the guy's name. He wound up being called the Buddha. But Siddhartha Gautama was just a wacky psychologist like me. And he observed that human beings are very much operating with two different systems, trying to make sense of this weird experience of being alive that we have. This was my doctoral work. And so one of the things I looked at was lottery winners. What happens to lottery winners? 87% of lottery winners within 3 to 5 years are broke, bankrupt, and their family hates them. And what's going on there? Why does January suck at the gym? Why is January so packed at the gym? But then very quickly, February, March, April, it just goes back to normal. What's going on there? Who's really in charge of my life? And so this metaphor that is literally 2,500 years old, that the Buddha observed that, or Siddhartha observed, that we're very much like an Indian elephant. That's everything below your nose, with a bunch of monkeys, either single monkey, multiple monkeys, trying to control this elephant. And so you got an elephant, or you got a monkey up there that believes, it's got six-pack abs, it's going to get skinny this time. And that monkey then, mine is typically a gorilla beating the crap out of the elephant, is temporarily under control of this elephant. But very quickly, somewhere, mid-January, actually, when you start to see results, the elephant will start to resist change. And so, what is going on? And so, the classic Buddha question, and I ask everybody the same question and ask yourself the same question: where is your identity? Are you the monkey or are you the elephant? If you've read my book or know this stuff, it's a trick question because the answer is obviously both. And capital AND, double underlined, neither. And so it is this third point where it is this monkey elephant observer or mind body soul. And that goes back, tens of thousands of years of people understanding that there's really three different kind of operating systems going on. And if you're a driven like me, and you have, it's literally the research. So if you have a very strong executive function, typically you have a single, or maybe you have a single thinker in your head. You have one kind of voice that's running the show. You may or may not even have the observer. And so a lot of people are just thinking, and you look at society and why the vast majority, 67% of society, is so reliant upon a narrative to keep them safe. Just wear your mask. Screw you, don't wear the mask, or whatever it is their truth. And that's what they find their identity in. If you're driven like me, you have literally 7 to 13 monkeys up there. I have multiple voices constantly, trying to get me to do different things. And I have this impulsive elephant that is just wanting to be free, doesn't want to be trapped, doesn't want to feel bored. And so meditation is this very different way of actually rewiring this system. And meditation is not relaxation training. Most meditation out there is a form of relaxation training. And as I teach meditation to mostly drivens, it doesn't work for us. If you hate meditation and you have this multiple thinking mind, it is because it is designed for single thinking people. It is designed for farmers by farmers. And if you are a farmer and you can close your eyes and gently imagine this, you got a single thinker up there painting this beautiful picture of a green valley with birds singing and everything else. That's great. I try to do that. I got the green valley and all of a sudden I got pizza and monkeys and naked women running through it. And so it is this constant. Most importantly, if I close my eyes, what is that doing to the way I'm wired in my brain? It is turning off the main thing I'm wired to use to go through this world. And so I teach literally eye-open meditation. And so if you're driven and have an incipitly dominant brain, do not close your eyes in meditation. But what really is meditation? And we'll practice. I'll give you some training on it today. Meditation is reality checking. And what does that mean, reality checking? Most of the time, the human animal is their central nervous system, what's going on in the elephant, is based upon what the monkeys are telling them. And so we're not attached to reality. What our feeling state is attached to really our thinking. And the way the human animal works, it's a very simple understanding. The way the elephant works, this is a recording device. And, the hippies are right. Trauma is recorded in the body. It is. And in the last 10 years, really looking at the human genome, you touch a hot stove, every single cell in that nerve pathway remembers that experience, little ticks on the DNA in the nerve. And so you have nerve memory. So the next time you touch that wire, that wire, what wires, wires together, it travels faster down that wire, hits the spine, and the spine, the original brain, original mind, contracts muscles. And so it is a reflexive system. And all of that's recorded in the body. it comes up into this middle part of the brain, which is the software writer. And so that records square or circles. And so the elephant walks into the kitchen, its radar, this giant invisible radar, picks up a pattern, square or circles, can be a painted, beautiful glass top or a 1910 retro wood burner. As long as it's close enough, you're going to feel a little bit of that in the body. And so you're going to get a little bit of that trauma released, which is going to tell you don't touch the stove. That's the unconscious. And the unconscious is not a mystery. It's right here below your nose. And it's just tens of thousands of recordings of these patterns. The monkey mind then and the elephant work in two very different ways. And the primary difference is time. The elephant, thank goodness, is a real time machine, meaning that it is designed, it's a lizard brain. So if you look around the room and you orient to what's happening in the present moment, there are no saber-toothed tigers, there are no cave bears, there are no hot stoves in the room. And so your elephant is designed to relax and calm down. So meditation is not about trying to calm down. It's really about getting into reality. And, where is safety in this? This is a mind blower for a lot of people. Where is safety? How do you get safe? And, the human animal seeks safety. We want to feel safe on one level. And it is not a feeling. Safety is in one place at one time, only one place and one time, and that is right now. And so the present moment is completely safe. So everyone listening to my voice right now is safe. And very quickly, the monkey mind goes, yeah, but because this thing is a time machine. This thing wants you to actually never be completely safe. It is always, and all that noise in your head, all that chattering, voices in your head are simply patterns that are being run, keeping the elephant on guard. And so I lay all that groundwork to really understand what meditation is. Meditation is about reality checking. And your reality in this present moment is safe. And this very quick, easy jump into spirituality, that's religion. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a big fan. Religion is for people that are scared of going to hell, a future thing, where spirituality is for people that have been to hell. I've been to hell. Living in a car was hell. And so how do I get out of hell? Is I actually learn to live in the present. And so this capacity to actually lay all that down, spirituality is this is the mind, this is the body, and this is the spirit. And so learning to live in a spiritual way, be spirit led. It's not some mystery. It's not something you need to conceive of. It's a literal, practical, applied thing. And as I always joke about drivens, if you got the monkeys running the show, your life's going to be chaos. If you're able to put the soul or the spirit in the driver's seat and be spirit led rather than monkey mind led and flesh led, wonderful things start to happen in your life. And so names for God, there's 43 different names for God in the big book. And grace being one of them, forgiveness, life, presence. Presence is one of my favorite. Divine presence. And it's not some special present. Every present is divine. Why? Because it's safe and it's all of these things. But I lay that groundwork so you can intellectually, logically get this. Otherwise,
Thank you, Dr. Douglas. Thank you so much for laying down this groundwork. This
yep,
has been incredible to hear, and I hope we're able to ask questions during this presentation. Me and my ADD brain are just firing off right now, and I am perhaps a little bit impulsive, but you talked about self sabotage, and it prompts me to think about all of the great leaders in the Bible. Actually, we've got King David, who was due to be uh, he was king, and he got all of this inheritance, but he squandered it by way of sleeping with one of his soldiers' wives and having him killed. And then you've got Paul, who said he wants so deeply to do the right thing and to honor God with his life, but he has this thorn in his side. He just can't do the things that he wants to do, he cannot do. And you
yep,
feel the anguish with the self-sabotage that is present with all of these various leaders. Noah had to be caught in the whale's mouth because he resisted God. And then there's just this self sabotage. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are around um, what are the behaviors and symptoms of self sabotage? Where does it stem
great,
from? Is it related to
perfect.
self worth, discipline? And then what are tools to use to resist it?
So perfect, yeah, perfect lead in. Um, Sabotage is normal. And another way to say this is everything we do is sabotage to some degree. A nicer way to say that is everything you do can be done better. And so that capacity, though, to really see, is it the monkey or the elephant that wants sabotage? What sabotages you? And so this monkey mind can imagine all kinds of cell phones and six pack abs and everything else. The elephant wants the familiar. It wants to know where all your landmines are. And so it literally is the flesh. And so this meditation, and I'll teach you a meditative breath, it's not complicated. So everybody keep their eyes open and relax your chest and your back as much as you can. And imagine that you're breathing from below. So you're going to squeeze the belly a little bit and feel like the air is coming up. And so you're not doing it from the monkey mind. You're actually your spirit or your observer is telling the elephant to breathe. And so everybody take a breath in and you're feeling these muscles contract. I'm in control. You don't push the breath, but slowly relax the muscles. And as you slowly relax the muscles and gravity, another great name for God, gravity takes the breath, you feel this expansion, relaxation in the body. And try it again. So breathe in, eyes open, really look around the room and orient and feel like you're in the room. And it feels this sense of calm and peace and grace, all of those things. Very quickly answering the question, your elephant will go, oh, that's wonderful. It will not tolerate letting down your guard for very long. Why? Because it's unfamiliar. And so meditation is the way through sabotage. And what I said earlier about there is no resistance in the present moment. Well, I don't want to do my email right now. I don't want to call my friends back. I don't want to do the laundry. That is all future. And you feel the elephant go, nope, that's sabotage. And so that pushing against, I have an impulse to not do something and I have an impulse to go a different direction. You're catching the sabotage right in the moment. There it is. And the good news and the bad news, good news that there is no sabotage in the present. There is no resistance in the present. That's the good news. The bad news is you have no excuse to not do anything now. So that excuse maker is the monkey mind. And so as you learn to discern these, and as you mentioned about the Bible, that this flesh is the problem, but it's flesh that is not met with spirit. it's not met with the, what Christ did on the cross is literally freed us from the law. And so we can be spirit led. But I can only do, I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. It's not me doing it. It is this capacity to actually, I'm not creating some bigger monkey up here to force me into stronger willpower that will always fail. What I'm actually doing is actually relying upon presence or God, if you want to really move through the discomfort of anything. And so sabotage and all of these things are so tied into a very simple understanding of how human beings work. And actually the solution is this spiritual path. But it's really applied, it's practical, it's real. It doesn't matter if you're going, Wednesdays and Sundays and doing all the right things. It is really about the moment to moment relationship you have with presence. And that is the path through sabotage. And yeah, the difference between Saul and Paul, or Saul and David, and really understanding what breaks a man is this flesh, and the realization that any life lived by flesh is going to be limited. That's literal, and that's based on science and based on observation and based on spirituality too. And so my flesh just wants me to go back to the familiar state of misery, where the spirit, then I'm free. Easy to say, but then it's a practice. And as I always remind people, being a Christian is the hardest thing. I mean, it is ridiculous how quickly you become aware of how limiting you are, how much sin, how much fleshly fear is really driving your life. So, but everything we do is sabotaged, and the solution to that is meditation, of actually learning to be present to your resistance. Great question.
Dr. Doug, can we continue on this for a moment? Because I'm curious to know as well, for you yourself, how have you been able to work through this? And what changes have you seen in your own life when we start to talk about even the spiritual side of things? And I don't know if you had euphoric moments, or if you had just this total overhaul.
Changes I've seen in my own life. I lived in a car. Yeah, the moment to moment changes the most is that is joy. I'm really happy, and I've got great kids, and I appreciate the little things so much more, because you're connected to the little things, and it is and it's become a way of being rather than something I'm doing. And so and it is a practice. I mean, I'm, as I always say with all my clients, I'm in this with you. I'm not, I'm not, I'm not there yet. But knowing you're not there yet and having a way to actually get out of my own way is just remarkable. And then watching the changes in others has just been glorious. I mean, I've witnessed miracles. It's really fun. And I get to deduct all the guns I buy. So
I think it's interesting, and I want to touch here for a moment. You talk about the reward risk, but especially the reward part, and how far do drivens go to get the reward? Because the perspective seems that it's that one piece is not just enough. How far did you go, or have you gone, to get the rewards?
there's a practice that I talk about in my book. It's a Zen meditation practice called the koan, where you're trying to solve a Japanese riddle. This is the sound of two hands. What is the sound of one hand? It makes your monkey mind go crazy. One of the koans I was working on was, when you finally get to the top of the 100-foot pole, when you finally get there, what are you going to do next? And I worked on the koan, and all koans, believe it or not, are answered in the body to fully experience the answer. And when I answered this koan, it took me about 2 years of real dedicated practice and embodying this thing. I couldn't stop laughing for literally 2-3 days. I was on a retreat, And I was laughing so hard, I separated my abdominals. Like, laughter is one of the ways of trauma releasing, of rewiring my elephant so I can tolerate more and more joy. And the answer to the koan is there is no pole. There never was a pole. I was making a pole out of that koan, and I thought that was so hilarious. And it literally, is rewiring my body so I can actually experience more and more freedom. I'm a big fan of Romans 8, that talks about, that we are, Christ was the first, we are an heir too, but we are really children of God. And that we are literally becoming more and more like Christ with practice. And, that more and more like Christ, meaning that I am more and more spirit-led and less of in my flesh and fear. And so that the practical application of this, there is no finish line. I say it in my book again and again and again. In my shooting retreats, if you're focused on, I gotta hit the target, you'll miss every time. If you're focused on, how do I hit the target? One hand here, I put one hand here, and then I go like this, and then I go, then I breathe. And if you do, it's remarkable what you can achieve. And again, it can always be better. And so it's in one of the practices, it's Aizen is what they call it. It actually translates as mastery. And mastery is where you're always in a constant state of improvement, and you're refining, and as Paul writes about, this thorn of pride, these things that stick to us are actually gifts, because it propels me into deeper practice and closer. And the closer you are to Christ, or the closer you are to God, the more aware of your sin. It's like, the more aware of how much I'm resisting and wanting to do it myself. So it's really, like I said, it's a way of being. And I don't know if it's fun. It's definitely, the entire process becomes the reward rather than the finish line. But as drivens, as you'll witness, we are chasing shiny stuff. And if you're the founder of, the company is usually driven, those are the guys I work with, and we got to make it better. But it is good enough is not a feeling. Good enough is a realistic KPIs and actually business goals, but if you're trying to get rid of this feeling, not good enough, you wind up with 2 PhD. I did Ironman triathlons. I mean, I've been crazy, trying to actually prove that I was enough. And the joke is that I'm already in God's eyes. And so it's that shift of identity. But until you are just beat to death, drivens, and that's what it took me. And I try to hear the soft, subtle whisper of the feather hitting my cheek before the 2x4. And so I'm better at catching it, but everything we do is sabotage. I can be broken in everything I try. And that's, Andrew Murray, guy who wrote a book called Humility, it is my brokenness is my godliness. And so it's in my brokenness is where I find the godliness, and that is so relieving, because I'm not trying to be unbroken, because I'm not broken in with. So
I want to tie that to something you just said, and then we've got a few questions in the chat as well.
Sure.
Really quickly, one is, how does self-discipline come into this picture? Or does it? Or how does that
Oh boy. Yeah, so I am a devout, disciplined person, and but disciplined to get the observer in, my soul in the driver's seat. And I have a very, if from the outside looking in, he's obsessed, he's crazy. I do breath work, I do meditation every morning, I'm in the Word every day, I journal every day, I do something called ice plunging. Ice plunging is, I did it this morning, where the monkey and the elephant wants nothing to do with 38-degree water, nothing. And so I can feel the resistance every single day. And I can hear my monkey mind, both the gorilla, you're a tough guy, you can do it. makes it worse. Or, oh, you can do it tomorrow, whatever. But I know in my knower that I'm going to do it anyway. And there's so much freedom in that. But it's not, discipline is no matter what you think, no matter what you feel, you're going to do it anyway. It's not I'm a tough guy and I'm going to push through. It's not about willpower. It's about disciplining to just do it with faith that, if I take these actions, in the name of good will come. So, it is, but the freedom from that, the freedom that I know that I'm not going to sabotage that. And it's hard. I mean, I don't know. It's terrible. I mean, it's awful every single time I get in. It is a terrible thing. But discipline is, I love discipline. I hate.
Okay, next question is this. We look at how social systems can contribute to the trauma through generational patterns. And the thinking gets me labeled as woke. And I wonder what you meant when you said reject wokeness.
What woke, depending what woke comes from is a good thing, meaning that they're woken up to actually a much deeper understanding that there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. That I don't have a problem with. What I have a problem with is the narrative that they subscribe to be woke. And meaning that I see it this way, and if you don't see it this way, you're not woke. That is not woke. That's the opposite of woke. That is not. And so it is, what I'm rejecting is the narcissistic. Narcissism is a series of labels or thoughts and things that I need to be perceived this way to be part of the herd. And you fit in. And to be a good Sadducees or good Pharisee, this is the thing that you must do. It's no different than a lot of the messaging, whether it's either side. I'm not picking sides. I really, any of that where you have to actually follow the social script, I don't think is godly. So I think that's what I'm really talking about. And so it's not we all do it, and I don't go to the grocery store naked. Why? It's not the rule. I don't want the consequence. And so I'm not following the rules just to follow the rules. I'm really thinking through it and understanding the consequence. And I don't want to be naked in front of kids. I mean, that would cause harm. So I'm really using a moral compass to guide my behavior rather than a social scripting narrative. And that I think is missing in our culture and our society. And I think that needs to come back.
Last 30 seconds. What would you say to whoever's in this group today? Because obviously not everybody is driven. But maybe for those who, if they took your assessment, they don't fall into that category. What are your final thoughts? Driven or not? Last 30 seconds.
Curiosity, 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 curiosity. Curiosity there is no judgment in curiosity. Curiosity is this observer and wonderment of just being curious. And curiosity and humility are twins. And so be curious about everything. And, when you're in your head and you're really, this is my truth. Why? Go one layer deeper and become curious and become curious and become curious. Curiosity is a fantastic path to follow to growth.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing today. We greatly